Many things have changed in 50 years. We became stronger, and there are many more of us. We grew. We moved from the countryside to the city. We learned more. We reduced poverty and now live better lives. We had to endure very difficult times. But we persevered and got back on our feet. And there are moments that continue to fill us with joy. And achievements that keep making us proud. The history of Latin America is also our history. We are proud of our region. We work every day to improve the quality of life of millions of Latin American citizens. For over 50 years, we have been the Development Bank of Latin America. Let's continue to build a more inclusive and prosperous region.
Good morning, everyone. The Honorable Com Ember, Minister of Finance in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Senator the Honorable Rohan Sinanan, Minister of Works and Transport, the Honorable Calvin Charles, Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Dr. Alvin Haller, Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Antonio Silveira, Vice President of Infrastructure of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America, Mr. Gian Piero Leorsini, representative of CAF in Trinidad and Tobago, members of the Diplomatic Corps of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, with the support of the Ministry of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago, gives you a warm welcome to today's seminar entitled Envisioning Long-Term Sustainability for Trinidad and Tobago, Productivity, Innovation, and Resilience in the framework of CAF's 50th anniversary. The Development Bank of Latin America is delighted to celebrate 50 years working for sustainable development and regional integration, together with the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago, who joined the organization in 1994 and became a full member in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent times, while Trinidad and Tobago has made considerable progress in terms of fiscal consolidation and social inclusion, productivity and climate change have been identified as key challenges. These are complex tasks that require joint efforts to create effective development strategies. Through the seminar today, CAF seeks to facilitate an open dialogue to put forward concrete solutions to improve the quality of lives for our citizens. Today, we invite all our attendees to participate in the CAF's seminar on social networks utilizing the hashtag #SustainableCAF and following us on our Twitter account at CAF, Agenda CAF. We also greet the public that follows us by live stream on our website, caf.com. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my pleasure to invite to you Mr. Antonio Silveira, the Vice President of Infrastructure of CAF Development Bank, to deliver today's welcome remarks. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good morning, Honorable Co-Member, Minister of Finance of Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Honorable Wohan Sinan, Minister of Works and Transport of Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Honorable Kevin Charles, Chief Secretary of Tobago House of Assembly, Dr. Alvin Hallery, President of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, ambassadors, representatives of international organizations, members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. This weekend was unique for me, just because my team of the heart in football, Flamengo, was twice champion this weekend. First, at the Libertadores de America Challenge, and yesterday, because of another match, we became champions of Brazilian soccer league. And what is amazing is to wake up on a Monday morning looking at the forest on this amazing hotel. It's my first time here. Usually when we come on mission, we stay on the shore area, but this is really amazing. The warm birds chirping on the window, and really, it's very nice to be here. Pleasure. CAF is celebrating its 50th year of operation in Latin American and Caribbean region. And it's a pleasure to bring here today for a very deep discussion members of government, representatives of business, academia, civil society of Trinidad and Tobago to discuss one of the main challenges for the whole region, how to boost productivity, how to bring prosperity to our peoples. CAF was created by an agreement among governments of Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, and began its operations in 1970 with the objective of becoming a financial instrument to support integration of the Andean group. Since then, CAF has broadened its field of action into new sectors, new activities, and gradually expanded its presence across Latin America and Caribbean. Today, CAF is the main multilateral source of funding for infrastructure energy projects in the region, with total assets of around 40 billion and a diversified loan portfolio of $27 billion. As a Latin American and Caribbean development bank, we are strongly committed to a comprehensive development agenda that seeks to achieve high, sustainable, and quality growth while fostering social inclusion and promoting cultural diversity and environmental protection in our 19 member countries. We consider that a close proximity to our clients and a deep knowledge of the region are decisive facts to deliver effective development finance. In this regard, we are very proud of our collaboration with the Twin Island Nation, which is by far the most active member country in the Eastern Caribbean region and the one where we decide to locate our Caribbean office. Mr. Giampiero Leosini here heads the office with amazing staff. That is, of course, we have to commend them on organizing this important event. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have approved in the last 3 years around 800 million loans, 3/4 of which went to support government's fiscal consolidation program, and the other 200 million for funding road construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance program that is already delivering impressive results. This year, we have worked in close collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Works and Transportation, and the Tobago House of Assembly to plan key investments designed to boost tourism and sustainable development, especially in Tobago. First time I've been in Tobago, it was like 2016, and it was really amazing. After Tuesday, Thursday and Friday working, a weekend in Tobago was really amazing. Boat rides, very good sightseeing, and I really think that organizing ourselves with the government, we can boost tourism, not only in Tobago, but on both islands. And this is a strategy that we want to follow up, especially on this year, 2020, that is incoming. In addition, we have provided a lot of technical assistance in the areas prioritized in government, such as drainage, food prevention, coastal protection, logistics, road information system, financial inclusion, etc. This partnership will continue delivering important results through our joint long-term commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, the success story of CAF has relied to a great extent on its capacity to articulate a vision of development, to define a clear mission, and to have a solid commitment with its member countries, as well as having the ability to mobilize external resources based on its institutional strength. One outstanding feature in the evolution of the major regional development banks is the growth of their intellectual capacity and the research capabilities to assist member countries to produce coherent and effective economic and social policies. CAF also has a well-earned reputation in this area, and as a result of applied research on all the countries that participate on the CAF. Each country presents specific challenges, but important lessons can be drawn from experiences of the neighbors. In our daily work, we strive to maximize knowledge, sharing, and we are convinced that events such as this one are decisive on contributing for this objective. There is no better way of celebrating our anniversary than reflecting together with a distinguished group of specialists upon the challenges that lie ahead to build a more prosperous future for all the countries in the region. With regard to the topics that we bring us together today, we would like to underline that CAF recognizes the need of develop initiative in a more vigorous approach in order to strengthen productivity and enhance resilience to climate change across the region. We therefore see this seminar as a contribution to a national dialogue on challenges of sustainability with hope of building long-term consensus among the key actors that lead to a pact for the productivity, considered a decisive step to achieve sustainable development. We shall hear from our speakers what ingredients are needed to increase productivity and what successful lessons can be drawn from diverse regional experiences. In Latin America and Caribbean, the lack of adequate infrastructure has been identified as one of the main factors limiting economic growth. But this region is particularly vulnerable to the climate change, and together with closing infrastructure gap, we must increase the resilience of all the countries regarding to climate change. Our second panel will analyze this issue from the perspective of promoting the blue economy, one that develops full potential of the country coastal and marine natural capital. Based on its experience of funding sustainable development and support integration process, CAF is responsive to its member countries' needs while being fully aware of the magnitude of the challenge that requires multidimensional collaboration at the region, sub-region, and local levels, as well as between public and private sectors. Latin American and Caribbean, in particular Trinidad and Tobago, can thus count on our determined support to close the productivity gap and foster a blue economy in order to develop a more integrated, sustainable, and inclusive region for its people. Guys, take this chance. It's a very important discussion that we will have here, and I hope you enjoy the whole seminar for this day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salado. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite to the podium a distinguished son of the soil, the Honorable Colm Mbe, Minister of Finance of Trinidad and Tobago. On the stage, he will be delivering the keynote speech for today on the subject, Restructuring a Commodity-Dependent Economy for Growth Without External Intervention. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Kizzy. My cabinet colleague, the Honorable Rohan Sinanan, Minister of Works and Transport of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Kelvin Charles, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Joel Jack, Deputy Chief Secretary, Tobago House of Assembly, other government ministers. I was looking for my permanent secretary, probably hiding somewhere inside of here. Hiding in the back. Dr. Alvin Hilaire, Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Antonio Silveira, Vice President of Infrastructure of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, other distinguished representatives from CAF, distinguished speakers, members of the media, distinguished guests. My address this morning is slightly different to the theme of the seminar, but I think you will understand my focus when I get to the end of my speech. And before I begin, let me just say it's a great pleasure to be a full member of the Development Bank of Latin America. I really have appreciated the approach of CAF to financing infrastructure, policy, fiscal consolidation in Trinidad and Tobago. It's been a breath of fresh air when compared to other development banks. For the last 45 years, Trinidad and Tobago's economy has moved up and down in line with commodity prices, particularly oil, gas, and petrochemical prices. The oil crisis of 1973 is particularly relevant. In that year, members of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries declared an oil embargo aimed at countries perceived as supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War. This caused a 400% increase in the price of oil. And in less than 6 months, international oil prices moved from US $3 per barrel to US $12 per barrel, with even higher prices in the United States. This was the first global oil shock, and it caused Trinidad and Tobago's GDP to double in just 3 years, from US $1.3 billion in 1973 to US $2.6 billion in 1976. The second oil shock occurred in 1979 in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. And by 1981, the price of oil virtually doubled and hit a high of US $39 a barrel. Our economy followed suit, with Trinidad and Tobago's GDP increasing to US 8 billion by 1982. Then came the collapse. In 1985, by 1986, the price of oil had dropped to US $10 a barrel, and our GDP declined in sync to US $4.3 billion. It took us 14 long and difficult years, to get back up to the US 8 billion that we achieved in 1982. In 2003, oil prices began to rebound, hitting a high of US $127 a barrel in 2008. With the coming on stream of the Atlantic LNG plant in Trinidad and Tobago in the early 2000s, which at the time was the largest liquefied natural gas plant in the world, our economy also shifted from an oil-based economy to a gas-based economy, with natural gas prices also reaching a high of US $13 per MMBTU in 2008. By this time, our GDP had increased to over US 27 billion in 2008, over 6 times what it was in 1986. I'm pleased to report that in 2019, despite another collapse of oil prices from US $100 a barrel in 2014 to US $26 a barrel in 2016, coupled with a collapse of natural gas prices from over US $5 per MMBTU in 2014 to less than US $3 in 2019, and a reduction of 90% between 2014 and 2016 in our annual government revenue from petroleum, or a loss of US $3 billion per year, equivalent to 1/3 of annual national revenue. Our GDP is still healthy at US $24.4 billion in 2019, with a per capita GDP of over US $18,750. But as you can see, we as a country have always been subject to the vagaries of international commodity prices. This is why the theme of your seminar is so important: improving productivity for long-term sustainability. In the previous energy price collapse of the late 1980s, the then Trinidad and Tobago government chose to engage with the International Monetary Fund in 2 standby arrangements totaling US $184 million. At the time, they must have felt they had no choice. However, the drastic decline in the price of oil, coupled with an international environment crippled by stagflation, took its toll on our small island state. The one-size-fits-all austerity plan proposed by the IMF at the time and implemented by the then government led to the collapse and downsizing of numerous companies, with industries like the automotive, construction, retail, and manufacturing industries suffering tremendously. That economic contraction of the 1980s, which saw our GDP decline by 40% in just 4 years, was swift and severe, with significant job losses, a high rate of defaults on loans and mortgages, and double-digit unemployment. Stabilization policies by the international agencies also demanded the dismantling of our social safety net and welfare programs with a view towards lowering government expenditure. The cost of living allowance was unilaterally removed from public servants. A negative list was introduced for imports, and the dreaded devaluation occurred, with unification of our exchange rate to TT, Trinidad and Tobago, $3.6 to US $1 in 1987, and a further devaluation to Trinidad and Tobago dollars, 4.25 to US $1 in 1988. These adverse effects of the IMF Structural Adjustment Program created the necessity for a wide-ranging program of economic and financial reform in Trinidad and Tobago. For the most part, monetary policy was conducted within the framework of a stabilization program whose main focus was on restricting domestic demand and restoring external balance. However, the decline in government expenditure and in real wages created considerable social and economic pressure, especially among the most vulnerable income groups in the society. This period of economic austerity also had a profound impact on the fortunes of some non-bank financial institutions, and our central bank suspended the operations of 3 such institutions which ran into financial difficulties. Our then central bank governor, William Dimas, and his team provided a steadying hand to economic management during those difficult years, in which our central bank, implemented a number of tough measures that were geared towards economic stabilization and returning the economy towards a sustainable growth path. By 1991, the economy began to respond to the stabilization measures and to show signs of a recovery. For the next 10 years, from 1991 to 2001, there was slow growth, followed by a tripling of our GDP between 2001 and 2008, as both our energy and non-energy sectors took off as commodity prices skyrocketed. Fast forward now to September 2015, when the present government assumed office. Oil prices were once again dropping like a stone. Gas production was on the decline. Gas prices were depressed, sending our economy into turmoil. That's just 4 years ago. Over the years, several missions from the International Monetary Fund had conducted their own in-depth review of our economy in their annual Article 4 consultation reports. We reviewed those reports, met with major stakeholder groups upon assuming office, who provided us with their own assessment of the economy as well as their own solutions. We also benefited from the findings of an IMF technical team who came at our request just after the 2015 election. Many of the proposals from the various interest groups, organizations, and experts had a common theme and included implementing a property tax system, expanding the tax base, increasing tax collection, increasing excise taxes, known as sin taxes on alcohol and tobacco, increasing personal income tax, increasing corporation tax, eliminating fuel subsidies, reducing or eliminating other subsidies and transfers, introducing wage and hiring restraint mechanisms, reducing the size of the public sector, and finally, reducing government expenditure to match income to the point of achieving a budget surplus. Does any of this sound familiar? Indeed, 25 years after we got ourselves out of an IMF program, we were advised to embrace the same old sterile measures from 1990. Focus on contraction without due consideration of the short and long-term adverse effects on our citizens. However, blind adherence to this severe model of structural adjustment at the expense of our human capital was not a road that we wish to travel again. While understanding the lessons of the past, we focus on our future and carefully reviewed all of these proposals. Some, but not all of them, were found to be appropriate, fair, and equitable, and were included in our first fiscal consolidation packages in 2016 and 2017. However, our economy was in an even more perilous state than we, the new government, had initially envisaged. Although our economy was basically flat over the 2010 to 2015 period, with just a 2% overall increase in real GDP over that period, The previous government had grown government expenditure to unsustainable levels from TT 46 billion in 2010, or just over US 7 billion, to TT 63 billion in 2014, or US 10 billion, an increase of 37%. Even before the 2015 election, we had reason to believe that our economy had deteriorated significantly. Indeed, several independent commentators, including the international credit rating agencies, were of a similar view. When we were able to establish the reality, we had to balance the need to ensure that the economy had sufficient stimulus for recovery with the need for reducing expenditure and restoring discipline in a medium-term fiscal framework. This was particularly difficult in the context of depressed commodity prices. But we chose not to return to the IMF for financial assistance. We had had enough of that. We chose a different path. We immediately embarked on reducing government expenditure to what we felt were manageable levels, from TT 63 billion to TT 52 billion in the first year, and eventually down to 50 billion by 2018. It's a Trinidad and Tobago dollars. It may sound facetious, but we were able to do this by cutting out waste, mismanagement, and inflated costs, also known in some quarters as corruption. We also chose not to reduce the size of the public service and to pay public sector salaries on time, despite being faced with a huge back pay bill of almost TT 6 billion, caused by wage increases granted by the previous government in the election year. We did increase some taxes, notably taxes on wealthy corporations such as banks, and taxes on imported motor cars, and we increased the royalty rate on oil and natural gas, a measure I will discuss later on. We also decided that it was time to reduce the fuel subsidy, which had reached as high as US 1 billion per year, a sum that we could no longer afford as a country. And we thus increased the prices of gasoline at the pump in line with international prices. However, we chose to maintain a significant subsidy on diesel fuel in order to keep the cost of public transportation and the transport of goods at affordable levels. Consistent with our fiscal and monetary policy and against advice from the IMF and local pundits or experts, we also resisted the temptation to drastically devalue the Trinidad and Tobago dollar. We also maintained interest rates at reasonable levels. The purpose of these policies was to suppress inflation and to keep the cost of living down at manageable levels so that the burden of adjustment on our citizens would not be too severe. Our policies have resulted in an annual inflation rate of just 1% in 2019, down from 6% in 2015. We have also managed to maintain 8 months of import cover in terms of our foreign exchange reserves, despite injecting US $8 billion in foreign exchange into the commercial banking sector over the last 4 years in order to defend our exchange rate. We also took a long and hard look at those state enterprises that were bleeding the treasury, in particular, our national oil company and our national airline. We found our national oil company to be losing on average US $300 million a year, and our national airline having lost a total of US $500 million over a 5-year period. We thus set about to address these chronic money losers, lest they crippled our economy. In November 2018, just about a year ago, we restructured, after a lot of thought and research, we restructured our national oil company, shutting down our national oil refinery, which was the main source of billion-dollar losses over the years, and creating a number of lean, focused, and efficient subsidiaries to deal with oil production and fuel trading. I'm pleased to report that the restructured operations have taken our national oil company from an annual loss of US $300 million to a profit before tax of US $100 million a year in just 1 year. And while doing this, we were also able to successfully refinance without a sovereign guarantee a US $850 million bond taken out by the company 12 years ago that became due for payment in August of 2019, this year. With respect to our national airline, we changed the management and re-engineered the business processes at the company for optimum efficiency, moving the company in just 3 years from losing on average US $100 million a year into profitability, with net income projected at US $20 million in 2019. These are just some examples of the fiscal measures we took to increase revenue and reduce expenditure, but we did it our way. If we had sought international assistance from the lender of last resort, there was little doubt we would have been forced to cut expenditure to the point that there would have been mass retrenchment in the public sector. The cost of electricity and water would have increased significantly. Free education, which the Trinidad and Tobago government pays for up to the tertiary level, and free healthcare would have disappeared, and our social safety net would have been severely damaged. We would also have been forced to devalue our currency in order to achieve the 6% budget surplus that appears to be the fate or flavor of the month of those countries forced into standby arrangements with the IMF. Allow me now to speak about the structure of our economy. Governments of commodity-based economies are always urged to diversify their economies in order to be able to better manage price shocks. But that is easier said than done. It is not easy to diversify an economy that for over 45 years has derived a substantial part of its income from oil, gas, and gas-based industries. No disrespect to the advocates of diversification, and no disrespect to my esteemed colleague, but buzzwords like the blue economy, the green economy, and the silver economy sound nice, but these transformations cannot be achieved overnight. Notwithstanding this fact, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is in fact changing. In 2019, the mining sector and the petroleum and chemical product sector, which are essentially the core areas of our energy sector, make up just 28% of our economy. The other 72% is made up of the non-oil manufacturing and a range of non-oil services, which has helped us to weather the storm created by the collapse of oil prices in 2014. However, 11 years ago in 2008, the petroleum sector made up 50% of our economy. So there has been a significant shift away over the years from absolute dependence on oil and gas, but it is still our engine of growth. Recognizing this in Washington back in 2016, we asked the IMF to provide us with technical assistance with respect to the reform of our oil and gas fiscal regime. They obliged at no cost to Trinidad and Tobago and advised us that oil and gas fiscal regimes should always seek to incorporate a balance among objectives. Accordingly, while governments should seek to promote investment by reducing the fiscal burden on energy sector projects of low profitability, they should also seek to assure the public that extraction of the country's natural resources always results in some minimum payment, such as an appropriate royalty. In addition, where a petroleum project generates a significant surplus over the initial outlay and the cost of production and continuing investment, the government, and by extension the population, should share substantially in that surplus. This underscores the justification for a supplemental petroleum tax when oil prices are high. Fortuitously, while in opposition, in the 2010 to 2015 period, I decided to go back to school. And just before the 2015 election, I completed a master's degree in oil and gas law at the Aberdeen Business School. My dissertation, by happy coincidence, involved an examination of an appropriate fiscal regime for an energy-dependent economy in a period of low oil prices. What a coincidence. In my studies, I never knew when I started that in 2012 what would happen to oil prices. In my studies, I had looked at a number of oil-producing countries, in particular Russia. And I'd taken note of the fact that over the years, as oil prices fluctuated, Russia had insisted on maintaining a royalty regime or a volume-based tax for its oil and gas sector, as opposed to a profits-based tax. It had done so in order to ensure that whatever the price of oil and gas, it would always earn income from its hydrocarbon reserves. By contrast, in Trinidad and Tobago, because the focus was on a profit-based tax, the new government in 2015 was faced with the prospect of earning no revenue from the energy sector at all for up to 9 years. One major oil company actually told us that they would pay no petroleum profits tax until 2024. So when the IMF technical team recommended in 2016 that we review our oil and gas royalty regime, it was consistent with what I knew to be correct. And in short order, we introduced a wide-ranging royalty of 12.5% on all oil and gas production in Trinidad and Tobago that is the subject of exploration and production licenses. In addition, we set about arresting the decline in oil and gas production, utilizing an empowered team of government ministers and energy sector experts to negotiate more equitable terms and conditions for the production of oil and gas by the major upstream energy companies, and to create the conditions for enhanced oil and gas production and a greater share of energy sector revenue for the country. Our very own Honorable Prime Minister himself led some of these negotiations in the various energy capitals of the world. The net result of these initiatives is a doubling of our energy sector revenues between 2016 and 2019, from TT 7 billion in 2016 to TT 14 billion in 2019. Together with the stabilization of oil production and a 20% increase in natural gas production over the last 3 years, coupled with an increase in our gas reserves proven probable and possible. We are also now on the threshold of sustainable growth for the future as we move towards our objective of a balanced national budget in the medium term. In 2019, because of our fiscal discipline and our revenue generating measures, we have been able to narrow our fiscal deficit to just over 2% of GDP, a far cry from the difficulties we faced in 2016 when oil hit the low of $26 a barrel. We have also stabilized our debt to GDP ratio at 62% for the last 2 years. Going forward, and this is consistent with your theme, our national development agenda will build on our achievements as we continue to take the necessary measures to avoid a debt trap and external intervention. In the context of the theme of this CAF seminar, we intend to focus on expanding exports and increasing foreign exchange earnings and employment, suppressing crime, reversing non-progressive values, attitudes, and behaviors, such as low productivity and poor work ethos, undertaking constitutional and institutional reform, addressing the impact of shale gas on our market, discouraging the culture of irresponsibility and dampening unreasonable expectations, ensuring effective and efficient public service delivery and implementation of development interventions and measurement of results, transforming the existing economic growth model into one that is environmentally friendly while addressing climate change, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, protecting and sustaining using our environmental resources. These are essential attributes of our development strategy, and we are already witnessing some benefits from the sustained interactive process of development. On this foundation, the economy is being rebalanced with revenue and expenditure levels significantly lower than they were in 2015 and strengthened with appropriate reforms and policies. This has resulted in our unemployment rate remaining at low levels, less than 5%, thus maintaining social and economic stability and inclusiveness. And so as I conclude, if I may be so bold, what is the lesson for other energy-dependent countries or economies faced with similar challenges? That is a collapse in commodity prices. The answer, in my view, is the following. While adjusting to a recession, strive to maintain social peace and a decent standard of living for your citizens. Be moderate and gradual in the reduction of subsidies. Stimulate economic growth while maintaining social equity in the country, by which I mean do not ignore or de-emphasize your energy sector. Avoid cost overruns, reckless or unnecessary spending. Maximize the revenue potential of your natural resources. Maintain a social safety net. Avoid inflation and devaluation. Ensure that you get the best deal possible from the multinational oil and gas companies. And at all costs, stay away from IMF standby arrangements. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all persons to their seats as we start our first panel discussion. So once again, we're inviting all of our attendees to please return to their seats as we start our first panel discussion. A coffee break is actually scheduled for after the first panel. But I realized we took an early coffee break. In order to reignite growth, policies should encourage the emergence of new dynamic sectors in order to boost productivity gains and contribute to a more diversified economy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our first session, Ms. Maria Danielle, a partner at Transaction Advisory Services, EY, to the stage. And our distinguished panelists will discuss the theme, Strengthening Institutions for Productivity and Growth. It's also my pleasure now to welcome to the stage speakers for this panel, Dr. Alvin Hilaire. He is the governor for the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. Patricio Miller, Director of Research at CPLAN for Chile. Andre Lopez, he's the IIEP Director for the University of Buenos Aires from Argentina. And Adriana Ariasa, Director of Macroeconomic Studies of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America. I now hand over to our moderator, Ms. Maria Danielle.
Morning, everyone. All protocols are observed. We heard our Honorable Minister of Finance said to get diversification, it's better said than done. But we really need to move the economy. We have to stop saying and get it done. And what we want to do in this panel is delve into what the sustainable development needs. And what does that mean? And I've read many academia on it, but I found one simple sentence that I think says it all. It's about using current resources for our current needs without the detriment to the future needs. What that means is what we do today cannot hamper our growth in the future. What we want to be able to do in the panel is look at what are the challenges that Trinidad and Tobago are facing. We have all the macroeconomic fundamentals to grow, to diversify, yet we have been challenged. So my very established panel here will bring to you insights, data, views on what we're not getting right, what we are doing right, and what are some of the other countries doing to face and conquer the challenges that we have not been able to. And what I'm going to do with the panel is we're going to start with a presentation by Patricio, which is going to give us context on those challenges. Then we're going to delve into a Q&A amongst the panel on different issues. And then we're going to invite the audience to give us some questions. Patricio?
Okay, good morning. It's a pleasure being here, and I have only 15 minutes, so I'll try to cover different issues: productivity, competitiveness, innovation, the fourth industrial revolution, and give you some ideas about productivity. What we say is not everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. Competitiveness establishes the country standard of living. Innovation is the core of economic and social development. Now, how to increase productivity, how to increase competitiveness, and how to increase innovation? What are the factors affecting those issues? I'll start with productivity. And here, what are the main factors shaping productivity? Now, when we start with productivity, we start with the firm. And here, the prevailing view comes from economics. And economists look at the firm as a closed box, and to which you get some factors of production inputs, and the outcome is the production of goods, and the relationship between the output and the inputs is what we define productivity. But that's one perspective about productivity. The other one is from management. Management does the opposite from what economics does. It opens up, it gets inside of the firm. And there it's quite important what the general manager does, how the incentives inside of the firm are provided, how decisions from top to down come, and so on. Now, also, the firm is not isolated, it's within a country, and in the country prevails the institutions and especially regulations related to ecology and community. And the community nowadays has what we call the decision to how you call to operate, and I'll come later on into that. But the other thing is we are now in the 21st century, and in the 21st century, it's quite important, the technology and innovation. And now we are coming into the fourth industrial revolution, and I'll stress that quite a lot. From the point of view of the policies, the technological policies being used for inside of the country, they are different according to what is the productivity level of the different firms. When you have low productivity firms, what you need is what's called extensionist policies. When you have medium productivity firms, you require technology transfer, and the firms that are on top, they do need support to innovate and to move forward the domestic technological frontier. Okay, now let me go very quickly to competitiveness. And what's the most important thing I would like to stress is that nowadays, given the information that there is available, Trinidad and Tobago should improve its ranking in world competitiveness indexes. And I'll show where Trinidad and Tobago is located. And that's a comparison from 2006 with 2018, what has happened to international indexes rankings of Trinidad and Tobago. And you see that there is a decrease in the global competitiveness index. There is a decrease, a deterioration in the ease of doing business, and there is a standby with the network readiness index and the corruption perception index that is quite at a high level in this country. Now, I think that more important than comparing what a country has done with respect to itself, when you are in a global world, you should always compare with the top countries in the world. And here you see a comparison of the same indexes of Trinidad and Tobago with a Latin American country, the one on red, it's the Chilean country, and East Asian countries. They are doing something that we in Latin America have not done. And instead of looking inside of the region, we should look over there. And you can see how Malaysia is doing quite well in different types of indicators, and where we are doing quite bad in Latin America and Caribbean countries is on R&D and the capacity for innovation, and how to critical thinking, and how we do not have a good standard of education. And there, prior to getting into that, where are we located now? And I think this is a good framework of stages of economic development. That first we start with comparative advantage. And comparative advantage is the production of natural resources available in the country. And growth is generated by existing productive factors. And for that, you require political stability, macroeconomic equilibrium, institutions, and infrastructure. Second stage is competitive advantage. And there you have to develop forward and backward linkages to the natural resources available in the country. And growth, in this case, is generated by efficiency and investment. And for that, you do need skilled human capital, financial markets, technological capability, and improving logistics. The third one is innovation. The third stage, innovation, and the fourth, industrial revolution. And there you do need managerial sophistication and Schumpeterian managers. Let me go very quickly on innovation. What's the engine of capitalism? And there, it's not what we think, price competition. It's what Schumpeter put it forward. The motor of capitalism is innovation. New firms substitute market firms not by cutting prices, but with new original products that could be more expensive. And the best example is the relationship with the typewriter and the personal computer. The personal computer is not cheaper than the typewriter, but uses a superior and disruptive technology, and that makes the typewriter disappear. And that's what Schumpeter called creative distraction. Now, there is an innovation paradox. If all the information and knowledge are available in Internet and Google, why all countries and firms are not together at the world innovation frontier? Why most innovation is done by large multinational firms belonging to developed countries? Why there is so little innovation in Latin American and Caribbean countries? And the answer is that there is a difference between information and knowledge. There exists a lot of information, but to take advantage of it, you require a minimum knowledge foundation. This is similar to the invention of the printing press. There were many published books in the world, but only learned people could read them at that time. Countries and firms are not together at the world innovation frontier because they have large differentials in technological and absorption capabilities. How do you acquire these capabilities? Okay, and here education is on the core of it. And the teaching education in Latin America and Caribbean is repetition, memory, solving known problems. Education required in the 21st century is solving unknown problems. How do you teach this? Who can teach it? Let me show to you how you are doing, how your 15-year-old students are doing at the PISA test of the OECD. Here you have the percentage of students below the minimum basic level at math, science, and reading. And you have over 50% of students that do not achieve the minimum basic level in math. You have there 46% on science, and in reading it's 42%. But now look at how many good students are at the top level. And in Trinidad and Tobago, only 2.5% of the students are at the top level of the PISA test. in math, and it's 0 really in science, and look, 2.4% in reading. So you have to improve your quality of the education at high school, at basic school, and before at kindergarten. And this is related to the last issue I want to put to you forward. We live now in a new era. New technology and innovation are transforming the world. 4.0 technological future is here. The goal is that not only Trinidad and Tobago, all countries, all developing countries, the growth strategy, it should be connected to how to insert ourselves in the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And here, this is a highly complex revolution. It's not like the previous one. And try to suggest you to read that book by Klaus Schwab. It's a short book, 180 pages, that he talks about the type of Industrial Revolution 4.0 where we are now, and how difficult it is to understand the type of world in which we are. And in this respect, here you have an incomplete set of the new technologies. Autonomous robots, simulation, horizontal and vertical system integration, the industrial Internet of Things, cybersecurity, the cloud, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, big data analytics. And look, this is from BCG, and they're missing technology 4.0 on that graph. And what is missing? Artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biotechnology. All of that is happening now. And you have to get to know them and how to use them in your productive process. And let me put very quickly the differences between Latin America and the Southeast Asian countries. And I'll put imports of machinery. Look at the differences between our region and the Southeast Asian. In Latin America, machinery imports are considered like black boxes. And the firms concerned, the entrepreneurs, the only concern is where to plug the black box. What do Southeast Asian firms do? They open the black box to understand how it works. And they apply reverse engineering to learn how to produce machines. And the stages they go through go from copying to innovation. And the first stage in Southeast is that they try to make equal quality of the good, that the same to the original, but at a lower price. In the second stage, creative imitation, implying higher quality than the original. The copy is better than the original product. And at the third stage, they are creating a new product. That's how you get innovation into a country. We're not doing that here in Latin America and Caribbean countries. And let me finish with what Angela Merkel put it year 2011, the urgency of Europe to get into the fourth industrial revolution. We have, that's exactly what she said, translated, of course, into English. We have to dominate quickly the mix of internet with industrial production to avoid that large USA digital platform firms take control of our industry. Germany has to transform its productive sector into a digitalized industry. For Trinidad and Tobago and LAC countries, the future depends on the skill of the people and not on oil and gas. Let me finish here and right on time.
Thank you, Patricio. And that leads us right into the next segment we want to talk about, because this is a lovely theory to which we can build a background on. And no matter what you do, no matter what you put, even if you digitize, it's people, process, and technology that makes the overall change. And when we look at our sectors, and Andriana is going to walk through with us, looking at the different sectors we have, looking at the energy sector versus the rest, where are we comparing in terms of the rest of the world, in terms of productivity?
Yes, thank you, Maria. I'm going to retake one of the phrases that Trisha used in his presentation, that productivity is not everything, but in the long term, productivity is almost everything. And why is this? Because productivity is the main driver of per capita GDP growth. And why does that matter? Because it's a standard measure of well-being in countries. And when we compare GDP per capita in Trinidad to GDP per capita in the US, we find that it's almost 50% lower. And in order to converge to higher income per capita levels, what Trinidad needs to do is to increase productivity. That is actually the cause of almost 40% of that difference. When we see that there's a wedge in productivity, in labor productivity compared to that in the US, we ask ourselves, well, why is this? Is this because most firms are low productivity, or is this because we have a misallocation of resources, namely that labor and capital are allocated in sectors or firms that are low productivity instead of the high productivity sectors? And what we find in the case of Trinidad is that there's evidence of misallocation of resources. Actually, we have some sort of a dual economy. We have highly productive sectors such as the energy sector, the mining sector, actually the trade, the wholesale trade and retail sector, and the hospitality sector, and to some extent the finance sector. But that lives with very low productivity sector. I mean, for instance, the agriculture sector, that is 60%, labor productivity in the agriculture sector is 60% compared to that of labor productivity in the US. If we look at the oil sector, it's 95%. It's almost as productive as the energy sector in the US. So we have this huge difference. Another sector that is not very productive, that is 34% of the productivity of the US, is the manufacturing sector and also the transport sectors. And these are key sectors in the economy because a lot of the other sectors take inputs from manufacturing to produce, and also the transport sector, if in the future Trinidad wants to expand its role in, or the participation of tourism as a new emerging sector, or or become some sort of a hub for the Caribbean, it needs a more efficient transport sector in the country. So these differences across sectors talk about what a certain misallocation of resources across sectors. Now, all these outcomes are the outcome of previous decisions of firms, and firms do not operate in an empty space. They operate in a somewhat institutional framework that constrains or make or facilitate their process of decision making. So there are certain factors that affect this outcome, but we're going to address that later on.
Thanks, Adriana. But when we talk about productivity, we're talking about the labor aspect of it. And I mean, I've done some work with the manufacturing sector, and it's about a culture of absenteeism. It's where most manufacturers are saying they have to hire 30% more than what they need just to keep their production going. But we do have other factors that affect productivity. Ease of doing business, it's not only someone coming into the country to do business, but even amongst ourselves, getting approvals on time, making sure that you could set up the company, you could get your town and country approvals. All this adds to the ease of doing business. Coupled with the fact that we are faced with economies of scale. So our manufacturers have to be competitive enough where the export market is going to give them, you know, the economies of scale, because the domestic market is just so big with 1.3 million people. Dr. Hilaire, when you think about, you know, the ease of doing business and public sector and how public sector reform could really change that. You know, I do agree with the Honorable Minister of Finance. It's easier said than done. But I do believe that there are some low-hanging fruit that we can really catch and change to start the process to make ourselves more competitive. What is your view in terms of public sector reform, where you see the 2030 vision in making that a reality?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me just congratulate CAF on the 50th anniversary and for having this wonderful seminar in Trinidad and Tobago. We really value the partnership, and we think this is something that would carry us through later on. And thanks to the panelists for setting an interesting stage. But I want, before I start on the institutional reforms, just to simplify and go back a little bit. When we talk about productivity, what do we mean? We simply mean production over factors of production, in this case, labor for the most part.
Yep.
So if you produce more with the same amount of labor, then your productivity goes up. Or you could produce the same amount and you have less labor, you use it more efficiently, and your productivity also goes up. It's important to get that concept understandable. Now, what is it used for? First of all, we use it to figure out what sectors we are most efficient in, where we can compete better, and where we have the best comparative advantage. It is also used for us to determine what are the rewards of the factors of production. In this case, we are talking about labor productivity. We are talking about wages, and that is quite important because when you see wage determination, even in as the minister likes to talk about it in IMF programs or so, a lot of it comes down to what is the appropriate reward for labor, and productivity is a main thing behind that. Now, looking at Trinidad and Tobago, our statistics are quite interesting. At the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, we measure productivity by looking at the index of industrial production or domestic production over the index of man hours worked. The latest statistics from the CSO show that between 2017 and 2018, there was a 13.4% increase in productivity in the non-energy sector, which is quite interesting and remarkable. When we add the energy sector and we look at overall, it goes down to about 9.4% because we had some issues in the energy sector there. Now, but when you look behind that, and if you see what I talked about before, production, man hours worked, you actually saw that between that period, 17 and 18, man hours work actually declined by 1.2%. So it means that we were becoming more efficient and utilizing less labor to produce. And this is quite fascinating. It gets even starker when you look at it between March 2018 and March 2019. The statistics show that man hours worked actually declined by 5.5%. So we have that as a backdrop. When we look Patricio talked about the comparison with Latin America and the Caribbean. When we looked at it comparatively, it was difficult to get statistics, but I was able to use the International Labour Organization's website. They have some things that use a model and they get productivity indicators. And our productivity between 18 and 19, because they model it so that they have an index for 2019 already, is 3.4% increase in productivity, which is actually quite good because the world estimates are 2.7% and Latin America and the Caribbean 1.5%. So we stack up quite nicely in that regard. But as I will be mentioning afterwards, there are some things that we need to talk about behind that. And let me just get into your part about the solutions. I think there are 4 sets of institutional reforms that we need to take quite seriously in trying to boost production. The first, it might seem basic, but is on the statistical front. I think if we are serious about understanding what is happening on the labor market and in productivity, we need to get our statistics much better. Our labor statistics are dated. We have 2018 statistics. Even our production indicators that I talked about, what we use at the central bank, the two indices, their base year is 1995. This is quite outdated, so we need to do that. I know there's some work on and the central bank had to appear before a joint select committee some time ago on statistics reform. We need to make that more, to move more rapidly, because there's a lot of work to be done. In 2018, there was the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. Unfortunately, we weren't there, but it's something that is quite important for many countries. And at that seminar, they gave out a number of new guidelines, which I think would be interesting for us. One is on migration statistics. How do you incorporate migration statistics, and particularly in our context? Another one was on forced labor. Another one was on labor in cooperatives. And then the final one was on the juxtaposition between skills and qualifications and employed laborers. So I think the first aspect is statistics, because if we don't have that, we can't be able to understand where we are. The second reform would be on the educational front, because we need to understand what is happening. Unfortunately, it is a fact of life that the small and medium enterprises tend to have a big role in labor and in economies, including in Trinidad and Tobago. But because of market failures, they don't have the understanding and the education to be able to improve their productivity. They may not have access to finance. They may not have understanding of how to do business plans. They may not know the markets in which they should go, how to navigate the customs, excise, all this sort of things. So the education is important, and I think that needs to be broad-based. The schools need to promote efficiency. Universities, the central bank is working to help them do business plans and so, but the education is important and the incentives for that. The third thing I think is on the HR function, the human resources function, because ultimately productivity of labor depends on the engagement of staff. They need to feel that they are part of an enterprise, an institution, a business, to be able to contribute. So I think the human resource function must not just focus on, the numbers, the sick leave, the different, all the things, but how do you get engaged staff? The fourth aspect, institutional reform, is not an institution per se, but it's really a partnership between the unions and businesses, this union-business partnership, because I think it must be a win-win situation where workers see themselves as part of a bigger picture, where to the extent that the business does well, productivity improves, everything goes better, then they are more engaged and they also have a better reward. So I think that is a fundamental part of it. There's a lot of studies that show that the more engaged staff that you have, the more productive they are, and the more that they would get better. So the union-business relationship, I think, you would focus necessarily on wage negotiations, but still focus on health and safety, on working conditions, on improving, on joint solutions to get the businesses better. And I think there's just some of the thoughts, those four reforms I think could help in Trinidad and Tobago.
So based on what you're saying is the environment is what's going to drive this change. Having an environment where employees feel engaged, they feel part of the bigger picture, and all those nice things.
Yes, this is part of it, but you could have reforms at the front, at the government level, statistics to complement that.
So you talked a little bit about the unions, and I don't want to dwell too much into that. And unions obviously had a place and a time, and there's a saying.
They have a place and a time.
They have a place and a time, and what got you to one place isn't necessarily the same strategy to get you further.
Yes.
So the partnership that you're talking about, don't you think that, yes, the environment, of course, is important, but a pay for performance type structure would drive productivity further. So a lot of the private businesses have incentives, bonuses. Is this something that you see could work in a public sector environment?
Certainly, the problem with that potentially is the statistics, because measuring output of services could be very difficult. You know, but so if you're producing cars, you're producing shoes or tables, or so, you could know how much. If you're doing services and you want to know how satisfied your customers are, it may be more difficult. But I think there is still a lot of work to do in measuring those and making it more scientific, because you can calibrate some of these by having, let's say, satisfaction surveys or output. How many people did you serve today? How long did it take? So there is some work to be done in that. So a balance of both, more statistics and more awareness of the output.
So you see big data and managing big data as a huge part of transformation.
Indeed.
Based on what you're saying. On that basis, I want to kind of roll into Andreas in terms of innovation and how you see innovation driving transformation. And I want to look at it from a few different perspectives. Innovation, you know, we're fearful of automation because people are fearful of jobs. But there has been just as many jobs created as lost in the digital era. How do we see digital transformation, not only in public sector, but in companies, to do exactly what you're saying, Dr. Hille, which is to engage employees, meaning automation moves you from the paper pushing to the critical thinking that Patricia spoke about. How do we get critical thinkers is to really move away from doing the routine task and using our brains more. So how do you see innovation in that area?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation and congratulations to CAF for the anniversary. Glad to be here. I think that before addressing your question, I want to say a couple of things about innovation in countries which are dependent on commodities, because I think this is a common challenge for many of our countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have been thinking about this for many years. And I think that in the 60s or the 70s or the 50s, there was the idea that natural resources activities were not prone to innovation, where they were low-tech activities with very few opportunities for innovation, and that they created very few linkages with other sectors. Nowadays, I think that we see things in a very different manner. And we see that many in natural resources activities are going through a wave of technological innovations that create a lot of opportunities. And the oil and gas sector is obviously an example, but also agriculture. Adriana talked about agriculture and the backward the productivity gap between Trinidad and Tobago and other countries. For instance, you have precision agriculture, smart farming, precision agriculture, which is using drones and artificial intelligence and GPS and satellite images for improving productivity. And so that changes everything. And that has a lot to do with Patricia's saying about the fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0. There's also agriculture 4.0. And I think that this also has to do with the productive diversification, because that creates opportunities for local suppliers of technologies, goods and services and inputs for agriculture, oil and energy, etc. I know that Trinidad and Tobago in the past has been trying to create that kind of linkages, for instance, through minimum local content programs. Perhaps that need to be complemented with other things about, for instance, creating capabilities, education, etc. And addressing your question, I think that the challenge is very demanding, because I come from the university, and nothing is more. I think that very few institutions in the world are harder to change than the university, because well, we have been here for hundreds of years. We are with the church. I think we are the oldest institutions in the world. And you hear a lot about changing the way you teach and changing the ways you communicate information and knowledge to the students. But these are things that are easier to said than done, like the minister said before. No, it's easier to say that you need to change, but it's hard to know how you, in which direction you need to change and how to change. I think that in this regard, we need to rethink how the educational system interacts with other parts of the society. I think that most of the educational system is very closed, and it talks with itself, and there are a few linkages with the firms and the rest of the government and civil society organizations, and because I think that we need to address that challenge you mentioned, the challenge of dealing with the opportunities and challenges of automation, how to involve workers in innovation in this new era. We need to address them at the very start of their educational involvement. In many countries, like for instance Korea, they are teaching programming at the kindergarten. So they are starting very early. But if you speak with entrepreneurs and firms in Latin America, they also will tell you that you need to combine those hard competencies like programming with other softer competencies like interacting with other people and working in groups and flexibility. I think that those competencies are even harder to teach, because you may have a manual for teaching programming to young people, but how to move to this culture where soft skills will be increasingly needed, I think that's a very demanding challenge. But the last thing I want to stress is that innovation is an uncharted sea, like Schumpeter said, like decades ago. So I don't mean that you cannot make any kind of forecasts, but I think that the forecasts are more forecasts often fail. So instead of saying, well, the world is going there, and for instance, those kinds of jobs will be lost, and because someone made some study about the probability of losing jobs in that sector or gaining jobs in another sector. I think that the most important thing is to be flexible and to create competencies that can move across sectors. You cannot make a bet saying, believing in Osborne and Frey predictions about which jobs will be lost, because that's not going to happen exactly that way. But creating, I think that the economic and the educational system of the society needs to create competencies that can move across sectors, that can be useful in a bunch of activities that we don't know which they are, because they don't exist still. But I think that this kind of thing is perhaps the most important thing for me, creating competencies that can be useful in many sectors, and workers can move across sectors as more jobs opportunities are created in places which we don't know which they will be, but surely we will live in a world where transformation will be permanent, and we need to be flexible and have the capacity to adapt to those changes.
Thank you. But, listening to you, I'm thinking better said than done sounds even harder now. Because changing your education system is not something you can do overnight. And I think when we think about diversification, totally agree with the Minister of Finance, it has become a buzzword. And you can't wake up tomorrow morning and diversify. It takes steps to build the ecosystem. As you were saying, Dr. Hele, if we move into entrepreneurship, you have to have the whole ecosystem to support the entrepreneurs, which is finance, knowing how to do business, the education system. We talked about changing the education system, not something you can do easily. But other countries have done it. When I think of our GDP per capita, we're almost the same as Chile. And we like to point out certain countries and say, oh, but they did it, that's an exception, and this is an exception. But what have these countries done to get it done? So maybe we could talk a little bit, Patricio, about Chile and what Chile did and how they have been able to consistently have one goal in mind from president to president about economic growth.
I think, like Andres said, that we have to start with the small children. We have to teach them how to be creative. Creativity now, it's a key factor for innovation. And in that respect, we have to see some of the biases or errors we have had in the way education was thought. We have been thinking that it's enough to teach the 3 R's to students, writing, reading, and arithmetic, okay? And we thought that if they learn that, automatically, they would know how to think. It's not so. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, look at what Socrates was doing 2,500 years ago. Who was teaching young people who didn't know how to read or write. And he was teaching them how to think. And that's something, it's a pity to say, we don't do it even in our universities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we have to, there is a paradigm change in education. We are moving from teaching to learning. And that's like an astronomical change from Ptolemeus to Copernicus, that in teaching, the teacher is the center of the class. And he does all the talking. And the students writing what he says and no questioning of what he is saying. With learning, you're shifting who is the center inside of the classroom. And that goes directly into the students. And I would say that when in a class, whatever, high school, basics, or university, the teacher speaks more than 50% of the time, he's not doing the job of trying their students to learn. And the students can learn. You have to teach them how to ask relevant questions. You have 5-year-old children asking what seems to be silly questions. Keep asking them, why do you do that? I mean, that's what Socrates was doing, okay? But you have to go further. You have somehow to, and in this respect, I mean, there is one big advantage of being a less developed country. We can copy what the developed countries have done. In the USA, they have manuals of how to teach creativity and how to teach critical thinking 30 years ago. So, and you have the advantage that they are in English. We have to translate them into Spanish in Latin America. So if you look at them, I mean, it's highly interesting what the way they teach 6, 7 years old children how to think, and using thinking as the way to learn. And that's a key factor that goes into the firms, where something that I miss, I mean, with Andres, we are at the university, there is a missing link between enterprises and universities. I mean, it's a completely broken linkage there. that shouldn't be that way, that we should be connected. I mean, when we get into the fourth industrial revolution, you need people that understand what's going on there in this mix between the digital world and the physical world. Why it's important nowadays to introduce this digital world into the productive process, because you do changes in real time and you improve the way how things are being produced in real time, and that's the way how you increase productivity. So that's something that you need a full innovation change in how we have done things up to now. And you have to put innovation as the main goal to be discussed. And the whole society has to be innovating. I mean, that's what in developed countries are talking about, the learning society, the innovation society, and when we look at the question you were asking with respect to teaching, Vietnam started to take the PISA test only on 2012, 7 years ago. And they did incredibly well right away. And Vietnam has one-fifth of the income per capita that you do. How come they do, I would say, 30% better than you are doing? And there, it's a mix of what you learn at school and how the family is involved in the learning of their students. The family is involved, and the family, it's not only involved, it learns what the students are learning. And that's something that, how do you change? Then the question we say in my country, it's culture. The Asians are different to we Latins. It's not so. It's not so. I mean, we do not, I would say, innovation. It's not on the genes.
Yeah. So
You can
innovation
learn that.
it's a culture.
Yeah,
Is what
sure.
you're saying. So we have to have an innovative culture. Well, I would, have to say that I do think we have an innovative culture. We created the steel plant. We create many things. I work with many young entrepreneurs, and we are a creative society. But where I will agree with you is I think we extract that creativity and we don't build it through the education system. So Dr. Hele, this was coming straight at you. In terms of, and we've gone a little bit off, but we're trying to get to the root of why haven't we been able to do what we say we want to do? Given, if I look at your model, on the comparative analysis, we're there. Strong GDP per capita, political stability. I don't think you will find many countries in the world with our diversity that lives happily together. That in itself is a strength. So Dr. Hele, if you think about our education system, and if we had to do what we're speaking here on this panel about really driving innovation at the core culture, do you think that is a humongous task, or it can be done, and should it be done?
Yes, it can be done completely. I think we have the capacity. We certainly have the intellectual capacity. We have the charm. We are very charming people. We have the creativity. We do things a certain way. And I think there is a lot within us that makes it possible. I think sometimes we may second guess ourselves too much and say, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. I have to look at the international standard. But no, we have to be more confident, move things forward and get things along. And I mean, the kind of things that we get involved in, and we are a small country, we are surrounded by big countries, we are, internet savvy, we have our businessmen connected everywhere. We know a lot of what we have to do, and we are doing it. I mean, just one example, our approach to time. Well, we have a fluffy approach to time, I must, in Trinidad and Tobago, if I want to put it that way. So when Kitchener in 1971 said, any time is Trinidad time, but no, things could change. I remember I learned it the hard way recently when I went to the Big Five steel band the other day. And they said it was 6:30. So I said, well, 6:30, well, that means 7 or something. So, so I turned up duly about 7 o'clock, and I missed, part of the best band, which is All Stars, which everybody knows, right? But the thing is that they started exactly on time. They didn't have a history of it, but they started exactly on time. And now I learned next time I will have #5, I'll be there, right? So we have the capacity to do it. Sometimes we second guess ourselves. Sometimes we may think so and so, but we could do it, and we see it. And when we have to perform, we do perform. And I think there is a lot of hope. I think this seminar, I think the other things that we've been hearing about, gives me a lot of confidence in our capacity to move things along.
Thank you. I want to just get back a little bit to the diversification and the sectors, right? So we've talked about some of the root causes: education, getting more innovation, driving change. Hopefully all of that will also change the ease of doing business as everybody falls in line with some discipline. But if we had to look at what can we be competitive in other words, we have the comparative advantage. The next step, of course, is a competitive advantage. We can't be all things to all men. If we're really looking at diversification, and I'm opening this up to the panel, to whichever one wants to tune in here, as we have just a few minutes left. If we had to go about choosing which sectors we should invest in and how we choose those sectors, given we don't have an unlimited supply of resources, how does one go about really working through what can I compete with the rest of the world and do that effectively? How do we choose those sectors so that when we're looking at investment, when we're looking at the education system, when we're looking at the financing, when we look at the development of the human resources, it is with a focused approach? Andres, go ahead.
No, I think it's a very difficult task. Perhaps many people know about the Asian experience. It's been, they call it picking winners. I think it's a bad name because I think that you get the impression that you know in advance which will be able to win. So, and you pick them from scratch, and that's not what happened there. I think that it's a process of continuous transformation. And first of all, you need to start from something that you have. You cannot create sectors from nothing. You cannot create, I don't know, if you don't have a base, a knowledge base, a firm space, you cannot create a sector from scratch. And so the first thing for me is to start from the sectors in which you have knowledge and capabilities, like Hausmann and Hidalgo metaphor about monkeys and trees. So you have some trees and you have some monkeys firms, and the firms can jump from tree to tree if they have some knowledge and capacity which are useful for the new challenge, for moving to another sector. And this is about discovery also. You need to discover which are the opportunities, and you need to address that in a cooperative way between firms and the state, because firms know a lot of things about the microeconomic dimension, and they know about the market, and the public sector knows which are the goals and the objectives. And so if you bring them together, you can facilitate that process of discovery with the help of experts from the university and civil society. So I think that the second thing is to make it through a cooperative process between private and the public sector. And finally, I think that you should again. I would stress this thing. I think that you cannot talk about sectors anymore. You talk about value chains. So you need to create capabilities in tasks which are maybe useful for many different value chains. For instance, think about software. Software is not a sector. It's a cross-cutting technology. It's a general purpose technology. So if you have good software programmers and good software firms, they can serve many firms, and many type of sectors, many type of consumers. So I think that we are not in the in the age of the Korean industrial policy, where you can say, well, I'm going to get to the steel sector, to the automotive sector. That's not how industrial production and trade is organized today. And I think that you must stress you must sorry, I didn't turn on my my microphone. You must stress the value chain approach and and try to move up, to move upwards in the value chain and go to tasks of higher complexity. For instance, from call centers to business process outsourcing, and so that, I think it's first discovery from things you already know and you already have. Second, private-public partnerships. Third, not thinking about sectors, but of stages and tasks in value chains.
Adriana.
Yes, I wanted to add something to what Andres was mentioning. When one thinks about diversification, the Asian experience actually comes to mind. But the thing is that they actually used a resource that they had in abundance, which was cheap labor. And that is not something that we have in Latin America, nor in the Caribbean, where we cannot compete in those terms, and we cannot start in that process at this point. So we have to think first in what we have and what we can develop. And I think that it's hard to conceive the economy of Trinidad and Tobago without the oil sector. The oil sector will continue to be an important chunk for the economy, but that doesn't mean that other interesting sectors cannot be born and prosper. And in terms of that process of self-discovery that Andres mentioned, I mean, for instance, one can think of a sector that has been interesting and emerging in the in recent times, which is the cocoa sector, which is interesting in other countries as well. And what does that sector potentially needs to prosper even more? Well, become perhaps more competitive in terms of the exchange rate. I mean, the exchange rate, an appreciated exchange rate, and this is something that happened in Latin America during the boom, but it has extended for a little longer in Trinidad. It hinders competitiveness of the export sector. It's not a goal in itself. I mean, that is what needs, it's a condition that perhaps is needed for some sectors to prosper, but also access to quality inputs. I mean, most sectors here work with either manufacturers produce here or imported goods. And if there are restrictions on acquiring those exchange resources, that there's going to be a problem. And also, in order to produce and export something, you need the adequate infrastructure. And when you compare a country with an equivalent GDP per capita, I mean, the case of Chile, you see that Trinidad outperforms the average Latin American and Caribbean country in terms of all the dimensions of the global competitiveness index, including infrastructure, but then underperforms in every dimension the country that is comparable in terms of GDP per capita with its Chile. So if you don't have the adequate ports, if you don't have the adequate roads to carry those goods and export them, then it's not going to be, the sector is going to stagnate. And that is something that you see in other sectors in agriculture that is more devoted to subsistence agriculture. And that is something that could also, with another setting, I mean, for instance, the size of the land held by each producer that is rather small on average here in Trinidad, that is something that could be addressed as well in order to boost productivity in these sectors that could prosper in the future.
Dr. Hillier, you wanted to say something.
You wanted me to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we have a
fine.
few minutes, so I just want to, just focus it a little bit. We talk about what we're good at, right? So, our last Entrepreneur of the Year program, it was chocolate. and music, which I think are indigenous to us, something that we can own and build. What is your perspective in terms of the sectors that you think can really add value to our sustainable growth?
I will start more broadly by tagging on to what Andreas was said. I don't think we should be picking winners in the sense that saying, well, you do this, you do that, you do the other. So like, let's say somebody has 5 children, you say, okay, the smart one will be a doctor and a lawyer, and the slow one will be a central bank governor or something. I don't know. So you create the permissive conditions, you create the education, you create the capacity to think, to learn, to be able to manipulate situations, to maneuver, to be flexible. And naturally, some things will rise up. So in our case, we have some comparative advantages. We are blessed with the energy sector, and we have to utilize that. We have good cocoa, we have certain talents, and so I think once you create those conditions, the best will rise up. So I think we have capacity in a lot of areas. Clearly, sometimes you need help, just like the child would need help, maybe the extra school work or lessons or so. The state, the institutions, the banks, the central banks help out to make sure that there's support in different areas. But I think there's a lot that we could be open to, and I think we should be quite flexible in where we go. So certainly on the tourism front, we have great, as I say, people, culture, natural resources, ecosystems that anybody would be attracted to. We have the cocoa. So I would be more flexible as opposed to trying to bottling it into certain categories.
One last question, and then Patricio, you'll close us off. One last question. Do you think that our reliance on the energy sector, and this might be an obvious answer, has really stopped us from innovating in all those other areas? So how do we balance that? Our energy sector has to be, that's not going to go away. That's our mainstay, if you want to call it that. But, when I look at other economies that have transformed, it has been a crash and burn sort of situation. We've been saved from that crashing and burning. So, do you think, in one short sentence, because I want Patricio to close off, do you think, that question, has it really been a blessing and a hamper?
I think it has been a blessing. It has given us the potential to do a lot of things. But sometimes when we have a lot going, we may hold back on doing other things. So I think now that we have a situation that we have to deal with, perhaps this helps us to be creative once more.
Great. Patricio.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe you should have one general goal, and I'll stress a country goal where I think everyone will agree. And I think that Latin America and the Caribbean countries have to insert themselves into the 4th industrial revolution. If they don't do, it would be equivalent to not having been connected to internet since the 1990s. Where will this society, the productive sectors here will be? Could they be competitive? Imagine if you wouldn't have internet. When you try to do something at the financial system, at the bank, and they say to you, the system is down, everything is stopped. So I would say that somehow digitalization, it's a must that the whole country, the whole population has to become digital. And that means that, okay, you need I would say, a roadmap, how to insert into the 4th industrial revolution, how to digitalize the whole country. Why don't we have digital governments, digital state? All the public services should be online, and everyone can access that there in an instant way. If that's something that some countries are doing already, and in the natural resource area. So I would say that the way I put it here is that the smart web should be available to all, including the rural areas, and we do need an ubiquitous information, communication, technology society where everyone can use computers and cell phones everywhere all the time. That's something I think we could agree, we should agree, in order to be competitive in this global world. If we don't do it, we have to be looking for another planet where we will be living, and we don't know the technology how to get there. So I think it's easier to try to get into this fourth industrial revolution to understand what it means and how to get there soon.
Thank you. And our time is up, so I want to thank the panel for the insight and great discussion. And on closing, better said than done, it seems we have to do it digitally. So I look forward to the other panel and hope that you all benefited from the insights today. Thank you.
Definitely a very insightful conversation with many valuable and practical takeaways. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I invite you for a 10-minute coffee break, after which we will resume with session 2.